You asked earlier about the arc of dopamine and how long it lasts. One of the key takeaways from that book, Dopamine Nation, that I've incorporated in my own life is that there are certain activities like cold water that create long-lasting arcs of dopamine. Those can be very useful for putting us into long-lasting motivational states. So these are not big peaks and troughs. These are the pain of the cold water, followed by this long arc of dopamine. Wonderful, it's kind of an antidepressant, positive motivator, natural stimulus. I always say if you don't have access to an ice bath, cold showers, yes, will work. If you have a shower that doesn't get cold enough, keep in mind that the original studies showing this dopamine increase had people get into 60-degree water, which is not that cold, 60-degree Fahrenheit, for 45 minutes to an hour. So your water bill might go up, but you could just draw a kind of cool bath and get in that up to the neck. So, because I realize there are sometimes some cost barriers to people. Not everyone has an ice bath. Now, the way that dopamine detoxing was initially described in the Bay Area, where it seemed a lot of tech types were talking about it, was in terms of, I heard something like, oh, people aren't even looking at other people's faces. They're really kind of living in this like monkish lifestyle, like no food that they really enjoy, no anything. That to me seems kind of crazy and kind of extreme. I mean, I can understand not ingesting a lot of highly palatable foods, eating some blander foods. I can understand certainly not doing any prescription drugs or taking some time off from caffeine. Caffeine increases dopamine receptors, which makes the dopamine that's available more powerful at evoking the dopamine response. I can understand avoiding certain substances and behaviors, but the idea that you weren't going to look people in the eye because there's going to be too much dopamine, I mean, I guess it depends on who you're looking in the eye and how much their look positively arouses you, but the fact of the matter is that that's not a very rational way to think about dopamine detox. But staying out of high intensity, highly rewarding activities, I think could be useful in terms of reestablishing that dopamine balance. And everything we know from Anna's work is that dopamine, if you drive those dopaminergic states too long, addictive drugs, etc., people can do this with sex, food, drugs, gambling, social media, all sorts of things, pornography. What ends up happening is the amount of dopamine that's released over time goes down and down and down and down and pretty much is traversing into the territory of pain. And then people, again, are back to this thing where, they're scrolling internet porn 8, 9, 10 times or hours a day, and then they're wondering why this isn't effective for them anymore, whereas it was before. And there's an additional issue with pornography, which is not often discussed, which is that, remember, guys in particular, the brain is a learning prediction machine. And I'm not trying to say that all pornography is bad, but there are good data to support the idea that if your brain learns to be aroused by watching other people have sex, it is not necessarily going to carry over to the ability to get aroused when you're one-on-one with somebody else, right? Especially young kids who are consuming a lot of pornography, the brain is learning sexual arousal to other people having sex.
So you're going to program yourself into being a voyeur?
Or just create challenges in sexual interactions with a real partner. I'm approaching this only through the lens of biology, right? I'm not a psychologist, and I'm certainly not political in any way. At least I have ideas about politics, but I just don't discuss them publicly. But the idea here is that I'm not saying pornography as a stimulus is bad or good. What I'm saying is in its availability and its extreme forms, it's a very potent stimulus, and very potent stimuli of any kind, extremely palatable food, extreme pornography, extreme experiences like bungee cord jumping, those set a threshold for dopamine release. And Anna will tell you that, and I'm sure she did, that the higher the dopamine peak, the bigger the drop afterwards. And it's not that you drop to baseline, you drop below baseline. So again, these things aren't good or bad, they just have to be controlled in a way, because when people are pursuing dopamine peaks over and over and over and they aren't getting them, typically it's because they've been pursuing that activity far too often. The cycling back and forth between dopamine and low dopamine states, dopamine fasting as it were, but maybe just low dopamine states, these are natural rhythms that exist in the nervous system. We have to remember what the dopaminergic system is there for. I'll say it again, I wasn't consulted at the design phase, but we know as a generic form of motivation and pursuit. You can imagine the human or the animal that's hungry or thirsty. It needs energy to go pursue the thing. So the idea that you have to eat in order to get energy, that's true. But you need energy in order to get the thing to eat. So our nervous system has energy also. That's dopamine and epinephrine. Yes, we use glucose and glycogen, etc., when we're pursuing things. But the idea here is you're pursuing something, and then either by smell or by sight, you think you're on the right track. So you go down that track, and then, there it is. You get some berries, or you get, let's get prehistoric about this, or you get to kill the prey and eat it, and then it gives you energy to continue this pursuit or to reproduce. I mean, there's a reason why humans and other animals seek out reproduction, is that every species, but certainly humans, have two innate desires built into them. Whether or not they decide to actualize this or not is the desire to protect young and make more of its own species. The key thing here is that, and this is the beauty of the dopamine system, just like the stress system is generic, the fear system is generic. It's designed for a bunch of different scenarios. The motivation system is also generic. It can be to achieve the next lamppost as a milestone, or it can be 5 miles as the next milestone. You get to control that. And so it's completely arbitrary, right? I mean, one of the most brilliant things that was ever said to me by an extremely skilled psychoanalyst is so simple, and yet I do think it's the most fundamental thing to understanding oneself, is that it's all internal, right? If you finish a marathon in first place, no one comes along and drips dopamine in your ear. You self-generate that. It's all internal. It's all about your internal representation. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't good and bad events in life, but the fact of the matter is that if you set the next milestone as just outside the distance of what you're comfortable with, and you make it there, if you allow yourself a moment to register that win, you get energy to then set the next milestone and achieve it. That energy is dopamine converted into epinephrine, into adrenaline. And this is why you hear these incredible heroic stories. I think the movie, I hate to say it, but the movie was less good than the book, but like Lone Survivor, the Marcus Luttrell story. And actually, I think today or yesterday might be the anniversary of Operation Red Wing. So all those guys sadly died except Marcus. And in the movie, it's like fast forward to where I don't want to give it away, but where he basically is the lone survivor. But in the book, it's crazy. I mean, the guy dragged himself on elbows and knees for miles and miles and miles, right? That kind of ability, where you hear about people walking on stubs to, these incredible feats of human endurance and willingness to persist. I mean, those people were able to do that not because of glycogen or they drank their goo or whatever the triathletes are always using. It's because of nervous system energy, the ability to continue to manufacture adrenaline and keep going. And the extent to which that can continue is no one will ever know. I do believe that humans have a tremendous capacity to endure and persist, but that few human beings actually know how to tap into that system except under conditions of extreme survival. And you also hear from really good physicians, ones that aren't into woo biology or woo psychology at all, that to some extent, yes, there are people that unfortunately die in their battle against cancer, no matter what, but that the desire to continue living is a powerful force in and of itself. There may be spiritual components, there may be, that's not the business I'm in, I don't know the experiment I would do to test it, but almost certainly setting of milestones and the ability to generate dopamine and adrenaline is what allows people to persist and live longer. There's no question about that.